Few people would have thought that a well-known and experienced doctor of medical sciences, who has devoted his life to working with dying people, would tell absolutely incredible things about his patients, who go beyond science and medicine, but prove that there is another world besides our world. Death is not the end or the destruction of a personality, but only a change in the state of consciousness after the end of earthly existence. I worked in an oncological clinic for 10 years, and then in a hospice for more than 30 years. Over the years of communicating with seriously ill and dying people, I have repeatedly been convinced that human consciousness does not disappear after death. Our body is just a shell that the soul leaves at the moment of transition to another world. This is confirmed by numerous stories of people who have experienced clinical death. When people share their intimate, deeply shaken experiences with me, my extensive experience as a practicing physician allows me to confidently distinguish hallucinations from real events. No one, including me, can explain such phenomena from a scientific point of view yet. Science by no means covers all knowledge about the world. However, there are facts that prove that, besides our world, there is another one that operates according to laws unknown to us and beyond our understanding. In this world, where we all go after death, time and space manifest themselves differently. These words belong to Andrey Gnezdilov, doctor of medical sciences, psychiatrist and founder of Russia's first hospice. He was born in 1940 in St. Petersburg. After graduating from high school, he entered the Pediatric Institute and then, after completing additional training, became a psychiatrist. He worked in children's hospitals, cancer clinics, and nursing homes. In 1990, he created and headed the hospice service in Lakhta, which still proudly bears the name Hospice No. 1. It was indeed the first such institution in the former Soviet Union. Extensive psychiatric practice and long-term observations of hospice patients allowed Andrey Gnezdilov to collect and analyze a lot of evidence that led him to an unequivocal conclusion: human life does not end after the death of the physical body. In addition, he was able to understand why a person comes to this world, whether there is a last judgment, and how it goes. Andrey Gnezdilov is the author of hundreds of scientific articles and dozens of books on psychiatry. 2 works devoted to the psychology of the dying, the fear of death, and the experiences of loved ones occupy a special place among them. Both studies are based on real cases from the doctor's practice. At the end of life, many people have no doubt about the existence of God and the soul. Andrey Gnezdilov spoke about this as follows: working with patients who have only a few days, weeks, or months left to live, I often encounter mysterious phenomena of the human psyche. Shortly before death, some doors suddenly open in front of the dying person, and behind them, a person begins to see the truth of his existence, which was hidden from him while he was young and healthy. One of his patients, who had only a few days left to live, shared her story. She said that she had been a staunch atheist all her life and denied the existence of the afterlife. However, at the end of her days, she came to a completely different conclusion. It wasn't until I got cancer and realized that I was dying that I saw the truth. I realized that there is a God. I know that I will be gone soon, but that doesn't scare me, because it doesn't matter to an immortal soul. God exists, which means I won't disappear. The doctor also remembered an amazing conversation with another patient. She was 60 years old, and she was waiting for the test results at an oncological clinic. In one of the conversations with Andrey, this woman asked, "Tell me everything as it is. Don't feel sorry for me. I'm not afraid to die. I can say that I have lived a decent life. I wasn't rich, but I got everything I wanted. I married for love, raised my beloved daughter, and managed to see my granddaughter. Now I want to know what awaits me next." Observing the patients, Andrey Gnezdilov came to the conclusion that those who adhered to an atheistic worldview often passed away with great suffering. However, there were many people among them who came to realize the immortality of the soul at the end of their lives. It helped them come to terms with their fate. According to the observations of a psychotherapist, such patients passed away easily, without suffering. Andrey Gnezdilov also described the way in which his patients most often came to the idea of immortality. Even while working at the oncological clinic, The doctor remembered a patient with the surname Rostovtseva. She was 62 years old and worked as a nurse before retiring. She became a widow at an early age. Her husband died of stomach cancer. This diagnosis became an obsession for her. For some inexplicable reason, the woman convinced herself that she was destined to die of cancer. She was constantly undergoing examinations and expected that the doctors would eventually discover something terrible about her. They say that thoughts can materialize. That's exactly what happened in this story. 3 years after her husband's death, she was diagnosed with a tumor. An operation was performed. The doctors assured me that everything was successful, but they constantly prescribed new tests. However, the patient was not introduced to their results. Uncertainty tormented the woman. In the end, she insisted that the oncologists tell her the whole truth. The doctors went to meet her halfway and informed her that the disease had relapsed. A new operation was impossible, and she should prepare for the worst. She couldn't accept such a diagnosis. After talking to the doctors, she barely got home and did not leave the apartment for 3 days. She was really hysterical. She stopped sleeping and constantly imagined how she would die. Finally, she managed to overcome her fears for a while. With many years of medical experience, she decided to fight for her life to the last. The woman visited many doctors in her hometown and even went to the capital for a consultation. She hoped that one of the clinics would give her a chance, but it didn't happen. The diagnosis remained unchanged. Frustration turned into hatred of doctors. Realizing that official medicine was powerless, Rostovtsev turned to healers. She had spent all her savings on their services, but none of the drugs had brought relief. When the money ran out, it became impossible to continue the experimental treatment. Now her hatred has spread to the whole world. She cursed the healers and psychics who had only appropriated her savings. She was angry at fate, at others, at life itself. Because others were given health, but she had to suffer. It was during this period that she entered the hospice under the guidance of Andrey Gnezdilov. He watched as her thoughts changed over time. At first, she was annoyed by patients and doctors, but shortly before her death, she changed. The name of God sounded more and more often in her words, and the fear of death disappeared. She passed away in complete peace of mind. Andrey considered the story of a patient named Gerasimov to be the most interesting. He was 54 years old. After the operation to remove the tumor, the doctors encouraged him, assuring him that he would live for a very long time. He was projected to live for at least another 20 years. However, during the next examination, Gerasimov was found to have metastases. They hadn't told him anything yet, but he understood everything from the eyes of his loved ones. Then he had a conversation with an oncologist who announced a terrible diagnosis. After that, the man locked himself in his room for a week, ate almost nothing, and refused to communicate. His character has changed beyond recognition. He became embittered, accusing his family of trying to hide the truth from him, and the doctors of giving him false hope and actually deceiving him. It was in this condition that Gerasimov entered the hospice. Andrey Gnezdilov found him still full of anger and despair. However, after conversations with a psychotherapist, the patient began to become interested in mystical literature. In private conversations, he admitted that it was the disease that opened up a new side of his life to him. He hadn't been able to get enough excitement in the last few days. He wanted to spend as much time as possible with his loved ones. 3 days before his death, his condition deteriorated sharply, but Gerasimov did not panic. He made a will, reassured his wife and son, assuring them that he now knows for sure that death does not exist. On his last morning, he told the doctor that he had seen an angel at night. He told him that his earthly journey was over, but in the new world, they were already looking forward to him. After saying a warm goodbye to his family, the man asked to be left alone. When his family entered the room a few hours later, they saw that he was already lifeless. His arms were crossed over his chest. Andrey was always amazed that hospice patients, being on the eve of death, found the strength to comfort their loved ones. This inner beauty, which appears in a person at the end of life, aroused his admiration. A person suffers, his body is destroyed, and his soul, on the contrary, is growing. It's amazing. Andrey Gnezdilov was often surprised by such patients because they spiritually rose above those who were healthy. A woman was dying in her hospice. One day, she had a vision of God. He appeared before her in the midst of a magnificent blooming garden, the very place where, as she understood, the souls of the righteous dwell after death. From that moment on, she lived the rest of her life in complete happiness. She was filled with joy and peace. The hospice staff came just to look at her and admire her resilience. All fear of death has disappeared. She talked about her vision with such delight that it was impossible not to believe her. Andrey's other patient was a musician. She was only 43 years old. According to the doctor, this woman fought for her life with desperate persistence. She did not want to leave her 5-year-old daughter an orphan. But 2 weeks before her death, something changed in her. Perhaps this was facilitated by near-death visions that arose along with the deterioration of the physical condition. It seemed as if she had discovered something that allowed her to face the end with dignity and peace. She asked for a priest and received communion for the first time in her life. Then she asked to bring her daughter to the hospice and told her, "I will come to you from the other world, but don't be afraid of me. I will help you all your life. And there will definitely come a day when we will meet again. It won't happen soon, but believe me, it will." This story is not the only one. For example, one patient at the cancer center, upon learning that doctors were giving her only 2 weeks to live, prayed for an extension of her days for the sake of her only daughter. The girl was 16 years old, and her mother was afraid that after her death, her daughter would end up in an orphanage. Her prayer was answered. Contrary to forecasts, she lived for 2 more years and died only after her daughter celebrated her coming of age. There are many such cases. Andrey told about a woman who dreamed of living until spring and seeing the bright sun. She died at the moment when the sun's rays flooded her room for the first time in many months. And one old lady with the last stage of cancer certainly wished to celebrate Easter and passed away on the day of the holiday. One day, an elderly woman was admitted to the hospice who, according to the most optimistic forecasts, had no more than 2 months to live. When Gnezdilov informed her of this disappointing forecast, he added, "There's not much time, but you can do something important in it. You won't be able to do everything, but if you choose the most important thing, I'll help." The woman promised to think about it. A couple of days later, she called the doctor and said, "I realized what's important to me. I have to apologize to someone." She only knew his first name, last name, and approximate age. A search in the city's help desk yielded nothing. Andrey sent a request to the Central Archive of the country. Time passed. A few months later, the answer came. "The information has not yet been digitized. We need to wait." But the patient continued to live. 4 months have passed, and the doctor has sent a new request. Finally, the answer came. The man she was looking for is alive, lives in the Urals, and his intended address has been found. The woman wrote him a letter. A few more weeks passed. She was still alive. No, the tumor has not disappeared. The metastases have not disappeared, but it was as if time itself had stopped for her. And finally, the answer came. A letter was handed to her. She opened it and read it, and the next day, she quietly passed away. Gnezdilov still remembers the shocking incident that occurred during his night duty at the cancer clinic. At that time, a 6-year-old boy with leukemia was dying. The rest of the children from the ward were moved to other rooms in advance to protect them from this difficult moment. The doctor came in to check on the child, bent over his bed, and suddenly I heard a weak voice. "Uncle, tell me a story." Andrey sat down next to her. The boy gently took his hand. Andrey began to tell the story, folding it as he went. He did not notice how the child was breathing more and more softly, becoming calmer and calmer. The doctor continued his story and did not catch the moment when the boy left. Gnezdilov cites an impressive case when he witnessed the awakening of the soul. There were 2 dying people in one of the hospice's rooms. One of them had been unconscious for several days. The second, realizing that his days were numbered, asked the priest to confess and receive communion. The request was fulfilled. When the priest was about to leave, he suddenly felt someone's eyes on him. He turned around and saw that the unconscious man had opened his eyes and was looking at him pleadingly. "Do you want to receive communion?" the priest asked. The patient could not speak, but he blinked in response. The priest performed the sacrament, and almost immediately after that, the man left. The last tear glistened on his cheek. There was no fear in the room. There was no terror. Only peace and enlightenment. It couldn't be a coincidence. A similar case occurred in the family of Dr. Andrey himself. His dying grandmother suddenly asked her daughter, "Go get the priest." The daughter was surprised. The church in their village had long been abandoned, and no one had seen the priest for many years. But she couldn't refuse her dying mother. With tears of despair, she left the house and went to the train station nearby. It was there, by an incredible coincidence, that she met a priest. He happened to be there that evening. Or, not by chance. In conclusion, let me quote the words of Andrey Gnezdilov himself. "After the end of life, our personality is not destroyed. We are just changing the state of our existence." This is confirmed by the behavior of people at the time of their departure, the stories of those who have experienced clinical death. Over the years of my practice, many such cases have accumulated, and each of them convinces me that there is an afterlife. Since all the material I collected turned out to be too voluminous, I decided to divide it into 2 parts. The next part of this video will appear on the channel soon. In it, you will learn the amazing stories of patients who were able to return to our world after a short-term death and told truly interesting things. Please don't forget to like it if you liked my video. See you soon.